All right, so we'll kick this thing off. So first up, just want to thank everybody for spending their time with us today, whether that's your morning, your afternoon, your evening. We certainly appreciate it, and we really think you're going to leave this webinar with just some really key insights. So, as a quick introduction, my name is Ranjit Rao. I'm a senior solutions engineer here at LeadSpace, just about 2 months shy of 6 years working here. So as a result of that, I've really had the opportunity to work with some of our largest customers, and they represent some of the largest, most innovative firms in the world today. And I'd say, without question, almost every single one of them, and really almost every company today, is really focused on leveraging an account-based marketing strategy. They all want to ensure they're focusing their efforts on the best set of accounts. They all want to optimize the ROI and the marketing and sales efforts and drive revenue effectively. And certainly when that is run successfully, we've seen it provide a huge boon in growth for our customers. Unfortunately, many companies just struggle to build out a really cohesive ABM strategy just because they lack some of those core pieces of technology that's necessary to help enable it. So today we'll dive into the details of how to really ensure you're setting the table for that ABM strategy with the right foundation to give you the best possible performance from day one. Now, in terms of agenda, to start off with, we realize there's a lot of different variations of what ABM actually means that are floating out there. And that can certainly change depending on the company you're talking to or even the person you're talking to. So for one, we want to level set on the most common and consistent definition. From there, we'll discuss the most common approaches and the challenges associated with each one of those before we then deep dive into what we believe the best solution looks like, along with sharing some best practices and a key success story along the way. Now, although the Q&A is the last piece here, definitely feel free to submit any questions you might have that come along the way. So what is ABM in the first place? So, now the way that we at LeadSpace think of ABM really does align to how Gartner, very highly trusted third-party consulting firm, to how they also define it, which is a strategy in which a supplier targets a select group of accounts that represent significantly higher expansion or growth opportunities with tailored marketing and sales support. Now, while most companies would probably agree that this is the right definition, it's much harder to get a consensus on the right approaches to take to really reap all the benefits of ABM. So let's dive into that. The first step in the process is selecting the right accounts. Account selection can either make or break your ABM strategy before it even starts. There's really nothing more frustrating than spending a lot of time and resources on your ABM plan, and then you just don't end up seeing the ROI you were expecting because you selected the wrong companies. So we'll walk through some of the most common approaches that we've seen and just the inherent limitations associated with potentially over-relying on each one of those. So we'll start with the first approach, which is sales intuition. Usually the first and simplest approach companies are going to take. And, it is a good way to identify some of your very top accounts. Sales reps typically have relationships and they have a Rolodex that they can hopefully leverage to penetrate into those companies. And, even if they don't have those relationships in their patch, they are certainly going to have very valid and, as we know, very strong opinions on some of the best companies they should be going after. And that applies, frankly, whether or not they just ran a simple Google query, like we can see here. Now, if you're selling into a large enterprise software organization, no one's going to argue against targeting like Amazon Web Services or Apple or Microsoft, etc. But those accounts do have, they may have certain intangible features that actually make them really difficult to sell into, and hence the wrong kind of company to target, right? Maybe their buying cycles and their procurement processes are really atypical, or they might prefer to build your solutions and products in-house. So, while that kind of method might be a good starting point, you don't want to base your entire account selection strategy on this. You also end up taking a really limited approach because you're not taking into consideration the most critical factor, which is data, right? This does not utilize any insights about your current customer base. the ones that spend the most money, that buy certain products and solutions. That's information that can really help you more intelligently build your ABM list and focus on the right account profiles. So without considering that important detail, you're effectively shooting in the dark. The second approach is firmographics. And now we're really talking about companies that actually are leveraging data. And the most typical type of data they base their account selection off of is at the company level. So a lot of companies have some kind of understanding of the revenue, size, geographic parameters, et cetera, that make up their ideal customer. And it is a good way to systematically target different segments like SMB, mid-market enterprise, or North America, APAC, EMEA, et cetera. So it's a step in the right direction. With that said, we all know it can just be really hard to trust the actual data, right? How many times do you have to ask yourself, well, when was this account record in our database actually last updated? Or who updated it, right? Was that manually edited by someone, or did that come from a third-party data source? And in that case, which one of our third-party data sources? Is that a source that we actually trust? So not only is it difficult to base the strategy on data that probably has some gaps and challenges with regards to accuracy, but if you're overweighting on the strategy, you might end up imposing some very arbitrary boundaries on your own ABM accounts. So, as an example, let's say your enterprise segment is 500 million revenue and up. Well, what about a 499 million revenue firm that has all the critical and tangible features of your ideal customer? You wouldn't want to disqualify this account just because it doesn't meet your strict segment criteria, right? Ultimately, you never want to artificially limit your ability to target the very best accounts. The third approach that we see often is intent. And now we're really delving into more advanced utilization of data and more dynamic signals. Because intent is a really good way to time your engagement with companies that are expressing those in-market buying signals in your particular products and solutions. So, very logically, it's often a key piece to a lot of our companies' ABM strategies. But it is very easy to over-index on intent and just end up with a lot more noise than results, right? The company that shows the most interest is not always going to be your ideal customer, right? You may sell to enterprise companies primarily, so the SMBs that are constantly surging on intent, those aren't a valuable use of your time. And in that case, you now have sales reps potentially chasing bad accounts and deals, or you're spending a lot of money on ads that are targeting companies that just aren't even the right fit. Intent tends to work best in conjunction with the accounts that you already know are the best fit for you, right? The ones that look like your best customers who've bought specific products, have led to your biggest deals, have generated the most lifetime value, etc. So, now that we've shared some of those, very common approaches that we see to selecting accounts, along with, the pros and limitations of each one of them, we know we need to go beyond relying on just subjective insights from sales and static firmographic data, potentially noisy intent data. But what's the best way to do this? Well, it really starts by taking a much more data-driven, predictive approach and analyzing the information you already have on your current customers, right? What are the qualities and characteristics that distinguish the accounts most likely to convert and the ones that are going to spend the most money? Ultimately, when you analyze your own business, you're going to quickly realize that your opportunity conversion funnel usually follows the 80-20 rule, where about 20% of your prospect accounts lead to 80% of your wins and revenue. So it's absolutely critical to be able to determine who your A and B accounts are starting day one, so you're not wasting a lot of time and dollars chasing the wrong companies. And to really nail down the strategy here, you've got to be able to ensure your models are leveraging AI and machine learning and utilizing thousands of different signals to uncover the accounts that actually look like your best customers. Furthermore, those models, they got to be able to be tailored to very specific use cases like landing bigger deals, cross-selling and upselling across specific parts of your portfolio, better lifetime value, etc. Now, with all that said, if you've nailed down this part, you're definitely going to be a lot more confident about which accounts are the best ones to go after, which is great. Equally important, though, is being able to pinpoint where they actually are. And that leads us to our next solution, which is establishing where those buying centers are, right? We all know how complex it can be to navigate the underlying hierarchies of large, really large enterprises, trying to penetrate into an account like Amazon or Disney with all their different various layers of subsidiary and parent to child account relationships. They have offices that are distributed across different geos. But that all poses a really complex challenge. So in order for your ABM efforts to actually succeed here, you're going to need a data asset that can provide true visibility into identifying both where the key buying centers are located and how they're interconnected with one another, plus where the true decision makers and buying committees actually exist. And that brings us to the next step in the ABM process, which is identifying the buying committee. Once you've established the right framework for identifying your best accounts and where they actually are, you've got to be able to ensure you're going after the right people in those accounts, right? You do not want to find yourself in the position of having spent lots of resources generating a great AB account list, but then you end up targeting the wrong people. So let's start with the first approach that we typically see, and that's targeting by title. And it's really no surprise why. Titles are typically one of the most readily available pieces of B2B demographic data available. And it's for that reason, it's a good way to start building out your initial audience. Now, with that said, titles will not give you the full scope behind a person though. You're not going to know their job level, the department they work in, their roles and responsibilities. And also, titles can be really fuzzy, right? It's going to be difficult to come up with all the various different permutations of different buyers when it comes to titles like a generic one like software engineer, right? That title alone will not tell you whether they're front-end UX focused engineer or a back-end Python engineer or a cloud DevOps engineer. Furthermore, there's just a lot of nuances associated with how companies pick titles for their own employees, right? What one firm calls a business analyst, another might call a data analyst, and so on and so forth. So you end up not being as precise in your approach when you're just focusing on that generic title. Now, in turn, companies also find that they've artificially constrained their audience a lot of times just because they were limited to targeting very specific titles, or in fact, there existed key buyers with titles that may not have met their strict criteria, but they had other really critical pieces like certain job functions that are ideal, that actually made them the right buyer. So to sum up, good start, but it's really important to drill deeper into the entire persona behind the individual. Otherwise, you might find yourself spending a lot of time and money generating that ABM account list, and you've got nothing to show for it because you've been targeting the wrong folks. Second most common approach we see, which is relationships, right? We discussed earlier how sales reps have those relationships that can help you as you begin to identify your top accounts. Well, that same concept applies to the investments they've made in relationships with key buyers at those accounts, right? It's a quick way to start filling out that buying committee. The problem is relying solely on your sales team's relationships is just much, much riskier today, right? It's going to be impossible for your sales team to know all the key decision makers and influencers within your target accounts. Plus those relationships can really only go so far. With folks now moving to new companies at ever increasing speeds, we just had the great resignation that just happened. Your sales team is going to be lucky if they even know 10% of the key buying committee as a result. So that dynamic nature of today's employment market just makes it much tougher to rely on a simple Rolodex that can quickly turn stale. So, again, we've got to be able to turn into more data-driven and analytical approaches, as well as take advantage of all the rich information that's hidden about our best customers. So let's jump to the first solution that we recommend to solve that problem. With personas now, instead of just relying on a potentially fuzzy or generic signal like a job title, personas really enable you to identify and target your key buyers using a much, much wider breadth of insights, such as not just title, but also level, the department, the job functions, technologies they have expertise using. Additionally, applying things like exclusion logic and adding weights to individual signals, that really enables you to both prioritize the right buyers and also ensure you're reaching out to them with the right message that's actually tailored to them. Right? In this example, we can see how customizable an IT security persona can really be, down to weighting not just those specific titles and levels, but even things like product and technology expertise based off publicly available resume data, open and social web data, et cetera. And we've seen customers who add this level of personalization to their process, they're able to double their conversion rates on the ABM plays they're running, whether that's across ads and their various different marketing and sales campaigns. The second piece of the solution here is active profile management. Filling out those buying committees is a great step, but that's not a one and done job, right? You've got to be able to ensure that those new personas that you just added across your target accounts actually retain their value by ensuring they're kept fresh and up to date. And that calls for an active profile management solution. That's not going to only ensure that you're keeping up with things like M&A activity across your target accounts, but also key activities like promotions and job movements. Right? Those are things that can occur really quickly and then can potentially make your buying committee stale and no longer relevant. Gartner reports that B2B data decays at a rate of 70% per year. And our own benchmarks show that moved individuals actually convert 2 to 3 times faster than your average leader contact. And your former customers who move convert even faster at 4 to 5 times the average rate. So that means it's imperative that your solution can both prevent the data on your ABM accounts and buying committees from decaying, but you also want to be able to take advantage of the higher conversion rates you can achieve through reactivating those people who've actually moved to new companies. Now, when it comes to activation and best practices, we all know a strategy it's only as good as its execution. So how you choose to actually activate your ABM strategy is going to be critical to your success. Now, from one of the things that we've seen, in the marketplace, a lot of the ABM tools that companies use today, they tend to be based first and foremost on intent-based ad programs, right? They're using a lot of reverse IP targeting and retargeting. Now, we've discussed how intent, it's certainly a useful signal, but it also means you're limiting your approach if you over-rely on this, because now you're honing in on a very specific subset of your potential accounts. And we know the ones that are surging on intent, those aren't necessarily the best fit for you. They may in fact be a waste of your time and dollars. And also because this is being focused on that narrow set of accounts, it in turn also leads to marketing ad fatigue from your prospects potentially. Because now they might be experiencing a lot of overload from potentially repetitive ad content and just a lot of high solicitation from your sales team. The strategy isn't considering the best fit profiles, and it's not using intent and predictive fit modeling in conjunction effectively. What we've really seen from our experience is the best ideal ABM tool set enables you to implement your strategy in a much, much more highly targeted and coordinated fashion across all those different key marketing and sales channels that you have. It's got to be able to apply to key use cases, such as being able to leverage intent and fit scoring to boost your ad ROI. So you want to be able to optimize your ad budget and allocate the high spend to ad campaigns on your best fit accounts. And specifically the best fit accounts that are also surging on intent that particular week. So now you can engage at the right time with the right message to the right account. And then you can also tailor your content based on the DNA of not only the accounts, but also the individual personas within those accounts. To extend that further, then you want to also start being able to utilize things like persona scoring and segmentation to really facilitate a much more tailored and proactive nurturing process across your entire customer journey. This is really about reaping all those returns on the investment that you're actually making on qualified demand. In turn, let's start talking about one of our own customers, HPE, and the success that they've seen with ABM, and more specifically, how they actually managed to solve some really big upfront sales and marketing challenges by driving towards the right strategy. So they started off with a really significant misalignment between their sales and marketing teams. So as a result, the ABM plays that they were spending money on, they weren't well coordinated at all, and hence they converted pretty poorly. Furthermore, those programs, those are ultimately designed to drive inbound demand, but they weren't even able to effectively segment the inbound demand from prospects versus customers. And so that just means a huge amount of qualified demand slipping through the cracks. And to put some further numbers behind it, they were treating 47% of their inbound leads as net new, But in reality, only 10% were net new, and 90% were either known customers or prospects. So to a potential customer, it just looks like HP's left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. So what we did is we built them predictive fit models to help HP focus on the accounts that are more ripe for buying specific products. And then we paired that with intent and persona models, which really allowed them to time their engagement with the companies that are in market to buy and also tailor the messaging to the key decision makers and influencers. And as a result, they doubled the lift in penetration into those white space accounts. And they also tripled their conversion rates on sales ready inbound leads. And that all had a direct positive impact on their deal cycle acceleration. So huge, huge benefits when they were able to put the right plan into place. All right, so that wraps up the presentation. We did receive a couple questions from the audience that we'd love to respond to. So I'll go ahead and read that first question here. And that's, what is the best practice for how often you update lead and contact profiles? So great question. Historically speaking, we usually recommend that our clients refresh their profiles on a quarterly basis at minimum. And that kind of cadence, I'd say it used to be enough to account for things like people moving to new companies and re-entering the job market, leaving the job market completely, and retiring, etc. But as I mentioned before, COVID-19 really accelerated the pace of all those activities across the board, right? The job market's much hotter today. There's a lot of people that have just completely left the job market for, durations that are yet to be determined. And, so as a result of all that, today we actually recommend that companies refresh their leads and contacts on a monthly basis. And, we've seen that the companies that actually take that approach, they're just able to generate more deals because they're actually proactively reaching out to the people that have actually just moved companies, and they're doing it with really tailored, effective messaging based on the persona that those individuals have. And like we were saying, those persona, that could change, right? If they've taken on a more senior role or they're transitioning to a new role. So you've got to make sure that that's active. So it's really all about making sure you're retaining the value on the investments you're making and filling out those buying committees. Good question. The second question that we got was, does LeadSpace help with giving sales insights in real time? Another great question. And the short answer is yes, we certainly do. And I'd say the way that we approach that is to take some of the really common ways of providing sales insights, but then also extend those to make them more actionable. So, we deliver both first and third party intent scoring. So first party intents can enable sales to proactively target the accounts that are coming directly to all your different various web properties. We can apply reverse IP targeting to de-anonymize the web traffic that you're getting, and then we can identify the companies that your visitors actually work at. But then we'll also extend that by enabling you to target the key decision makers and influencers within those accounts using the personas. Because a lot of times the people that are actually doing the initial research on your website, they're just more junior level, right? They're junior level and they're not necessarily the right people to reach out to. They may have been tasked with a research job by someone higher up in the organization. So personas enable you to actually hone in on that true buying committee. In turn, we also deliver third-party intent, and that's going to monitor your target accounts on an ongoing basis to really identify those surges in interest in, different products and solutions that you sell based on their interactions with outside sources now. And, when you pair both of those up, both those solutions are going to enable your sales team to get real-time insights about accounts that might be market to buy. But, as we've discussed, it becomes much, much more powerful when you combine that intent with the predictive fit models, because now you're timing engagement with the accounts that already look like your best customers. The ROI is much, much stronger there. Furthermore, that active profile management framework that I discussed earlier, that also ensures that sales gets alerts when, people in those key buying committees are actually moving companies and switching jobs. So it becomes really, really impactful for, reactivating former customers. All right. Well, with that, I think we have come to the end of the presentation. Thanks everybody for the time, and hope you left with some solid insights. Thanks, everybody.